bring in Brenden Nunes of the King's Pulse in the King's Beat podcast. We bring him in here to close out this day, talking about a little bit of everything. But we're talking about the Kings right now. First of all, Brenden, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. My apologies for the delay. I got a little bit behind on the road, but I'm doing good. Always happy to join you guys. What about yourself?
Man, I'm good, man. Don't worry about none of that. It's all good. We're just glad to talk to you. But I was just asking James about this coaching staff that got finalized with the Kings. And I'll ask James first. I'm not saying anybody's Pete Carril, but like, what are some of the roles of these guys on the staff? Like, we know like the terms like defensive coordinator, whatever, but like, is the assistant head coach Jordy Fernandez, like, what's going to be his role here? Is it going to be just Mike Brown's right hand man, or is he doing some skill development stuff or game planning? Like, what are some of the roles these guys are going to have?
Yeah, I think it's interesting the way they've built this staff. There is a lot of experience, a lot of guys who have spent time with Mike Brown in the past. A lot of guys who have like worked together in the past. Of course, Doug Christie and Lindsey Harding are back, and they're the only two holdovers from the staff. But even like Jay Triano is a guy who's been around the game, the league for a long time. I don't know that they have specific, like, you are the offensive coordinator, and even that in itself was a very interesting thing that Luke kind of came up with, where he had a full-fledged defensive coordinator, almost like a football staff. I'll say if I look at all of it, number one, they have ties to Mike Brown. Number two, there's a ton of player development guys who work their way up in the league as player development people. Jordy Fernandez is a guy who Mike Brown hired to help work with his son on playing basketball. So you're seeing all of these guys, Luke Laux, they're player development guys. And so I think the emphasis is that way. Like, they're going to try to teach this thing. And I think that's where guys like Doug fit in. Like, Doug is a teacher. He wants to teach as much as he wants to get out there and, work with guys on how to shoot a basketball. That's not what it's about. It's about, taking some of the things that Coachy would have imparted to him and imparting them onto the next generation.
Yeah, Brenden, in your opinion, does this coaching staff, for a lack of a better term, does it make sense to you? Do you see like the vision of what Mike Brown is trying to create and the culture that he's trying to create? Do you see that kind of evolving and starting with this coaching staff that he has?
I think so. I think the way that James pointed out of guys that have worked their way up, I think is a good quality and says a lot about people. And I'm impressed with the amount of history and guys that have time in this field that Mike Brown was able to bring in. Like mentioned Jay Triano, that was head coach of the Canadian national team. I think Triano has a lot of experience. I funnily think of Triano with that tip-in game winner where you can't technically goaltend if you're passing the ball from out of bounds. And he hit that with Tyson Chandler when he was the interim head coach with the Phoenix Suns. But he obviously has a lot of experience. Jordy Fernandez has spent a lot of time and has a close relationship with Mike Brown. Luke Laux falls into the same. All of them spent some time with Team Nigeria. And then you have three different guys on the roster from that same team as well. So I certainly think that there's a lot of familiarity between the guys themselves. And it's hard to judge because I only know so much about these guys. But my question for you, James, actually, is someone that's been around it for a little longer. Is this abnormal to see this big of a coaching staff? Like, it feels like there could be one coach assigned to every player on this roster.
Yeah, it's a huge coaching staff. And I think we've seen the league going that way, like getting bigger and bigger coaching staff wise. Like, we talked to Jerry, and it was when Jerry was a coach, it was him and I can't remember. There was only one other assistant coach with him. So it used to be like a trainer would book all your travel. So guys like Pete Youngman, like, they booked your flights and your hotels and who's driving you to the hotel and what company is driving you from the hotel to the arena. Like, the way that it's expanded is really, really intriguing to see. But I also think, the players have gotten younger in the league. The one and dones aren't allowed in the league anymore, but we're still seeing a bunch of players that are, the one and dones are. The The high school players aren't allowed. And we're seeing a lot of younger players, 19, 20-year-old, they need more support. And so I think that's part of it. And I like the staff. Even which is it, Dutch Gately. He spent the last 4 seasons in Charlotte working with Jay Triano on Borrego's staff. Like, these are things that are good, and they're guys. Most of the guys that they're bringing in are guys that, well, there's a lot of them that have come straight from the Spurs. Guys who have, even Mike Brown worked for the Spurs organization at one point as an assistant. So you're getting guys who they know their role and their system, and I think it'll be a good staff.
Yeah. I want to ask you guys both a question, because I was having this discussion with Damien before he left. Matter of fact, before the Arco Arena gods cut off his internet the other day. And we were talking about the Kings having Mike Brown as a coach and how they can move up, as a team, their defensive rating in the league. And we had mentioned, this is the first time they had a defensive-minded head coach. And I said, I kind of feel like Luke Walton was a defensive-minded head coach. Am I right or wrong on that? And I bring that up because I remember Luke. I feel like I remember Luke talking about everything we do starts on defense. Like, he would always say that. Maybe he wouldn't emphasize it in the way that he rolled out the starting lineup or whatever, but he was always talking about everything we start has to be on the defensive end. Is it fair to call him a defensive-minded head coach?
Go ahead, Brenden.
I don't know. I don't feel like I heard it quite as much as I will with, or have so far, with Mike Brown. And I feel like the difference is, there's a difference between saying it and actually holding the players accountable. And obviously we've yet to see that from Mike Brown. It's until we actually see him as head coach of the Sacramento Kings and kind of decisions that he decides to make when it comes to rotations. But in my mind, Mike Brown is somebody that'll pull De'Aaron Fox if he's not locked in on the defensive end and go towards Davion Mitchell. And maybe some of that has to do with a difference in roster. Maybe you have a couple more capable defensive players, although I still think that they're underwhelming when it comes to defensive talent. But I think that's the difference, because I think you're going to get that from every coach. Coaches know the importance of defense, but I think it's the difference is, are you really going to hold them accountable when it comes down to it? What do you think, James?
Yeah, it's kind of like are you a 2 that plays 3 or a 3 that plays 2 type deal? Or what does Jerry always say? Are you a basketball player that happens to be tall, or a tall person who plays basketball? I think the Kings have always had coaches that are offensive coaches that also have to coach defense. And now Mike Brown is a defensive coach who also has to coach offense. And I think some of the concern is that Mike Brown is going to slow everything down, and you have a Ferrari and you're going to make him drive in the slow lane. So I think there is some concern about that. But we won't know until we see it functionally on the court. And, overall, I think that when you look at Mike Brown and the situation he's in versus the situation that Luke Walton was in a can't win situation. I mean, Vlade was fired early in right after his first season, right? Mm-hmm. So you're almost a lame duck guy the whole time. You got new guys coming in, and that transition, it doesn't matter if it's the Kings or anyone else. It's always the same. You're trying to work with a new front office guy to try to keep him happy and keep the wheels going, the wheels on the bus. But at the end of the day, what you're not able to do is really play the guys that you want to play and do the things that you want to do, because you're always worried about hurting Buddy Hield's trade value. Because if you hurt Buddy Hield's trade value, then A, you can't trade him, but also B, you're not doing your GM any favors, and he's not going to do you any favors type deal. And that's why I think that starting fresh with Mike Brown, with a team that wants to be here, a group of players that are under contract together for a while, except for guys, the handful of guys that aren't. But yeah, I think that we're at a position where defense will be a focus. Luke Walton, his era it's more marred by the bubble and what happened with Vlade than it is anything else.
No.
Kenny, you might have talked about this before, but I'm curious, how much better do you think the Kings are defensively this year?
Oh, ironically, that's what I wanted to ask you, because I think they have the potential when you combine guys that just have a better basketball IQ, have a better sense probably of team defense, and just what you're supposed to do out there on the basketball court. You combine that with the fact that you got Mike Brown, who's going to, I'm assuming, teach these guys to be better defenders and really harp on that. I'm thinking they can get anywhere between the top 12 defense in the team, like if everything goes perfect, to 18. And I know me and James talk about this a lot, but when I say 18, he's like, oh, that's asking a lot. I was like, that should be asking a lot at all. Like to be that's below average. To get you to the point where you're below average and you've got a completely different roster out there. A lot of the times you were playing with like 2 or 3 guys that just were zeros on defense when you talk about Buddy and Marvin. Like just subbing those 2 out, and Tyrese Halliburton wasn't great on the defensive end. Just subbing those guys out alone should have you in a better spot.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a lot to ask, but in the last 8 or 9 years, I think the Kings have only not been in a bottom 10 defensive rating one time. Like it shouldn't be a big ask, but it kind of has been. And I am somebody that kind of subscribes to the whole defense wins championships, and I think like the translation of that and not keeping it so simple is just like defense is something that you can do consistently. If you're a good offensive team, sometimes you're going to have nights that shots don't go down, but you can bring good defense every single night. And I think that's why we haven't seen that much consistency with the Kings as of late. And I just don't know how much better the roster got. I think a lot of it is going to have to do with communication and guys being on the same page. And I think a lot of buy-in should show itself on the defensive end, but I don't know. Top 18 does feel like a lot to ask.
Top 18? They can't be the 18th best defensive team in the league.
I'm with you. It shouldn't be a lot to ask, but I think like for this roster and the starting point that they're at, I think it is. Because a lot of what I'm looking at in my mind where the improvement comes from is what you mentioned. Like there's high IQ players now, but I think that's less of like, I think they have really good defenders and more so they replace really bad defenders with like mediocre, slightly above average defenders. So I'm like, you got better, but I don't know that you're a good defensive team.
Here's the deal. We're winding down. So James, I'll let you answer this on the post